Hello, everyone. I'll give it a couple minutes for folks to join. A reminder, please put your name in the attendance list, and the link to the notes doc is in the chat. Give it 45 more seconds, and then we'll get going here. All right, we're at 3 after, so we'll go ahead and get going. Thanks everyone for joining today. We have a couple items on the agenda. First and perhaps foremost, congratulations and thanks to
Probably while I work.
Hey Jack, can you go on mute, please? Thank you.
Sorry.
So congrats, no worries. Congrats and thanks to everyone who participated in the elections for both the TAC as well as the Security Community Individual Representative. The election results were announced yesterday. And so I put the names of those folks who did win the elected seats there in the notes. There are a couple governing board seats that are denoted by appointment, and so the process for the governing board to select those appointees and vote on them is underway. So by the next TAC meeting, we should have a full TAC seated and ready to rock and roll for the next year. That being said, looking at the attendee list, as well as given the transition spot that we find ourselves in, I'm going to move that we're not going to make any binding votes today. So simply some of this will be carryover from last year, some of it will be carry forward context for folks. But given that we're in that kind of state of transition, I think it's most appropriate to let it be and just have this meeting be a discussion meeting. Any questions on that before we continue with the rest of today's agenda? All right, and then the one last thing I wanted to note is that once we do have a fully seated TAC, one of the first orders of business on the next TAC meeting will be to hold an election for a new chair. So once we have that, once we have the full TAC appointed, we'll proceed with that process at the next meeting. All right. Next item we have on the agenda is an update from the Supply Chain Integrity Working Group, and I see Isaac Hepworth here on the Zoom call with us. So with that, Isaac, I'll hand it over to you, slotted for about 10 minutes.
That's great. Thanks, Bob, and good to see everyone here. So I'm Isaac. I work at Google, actually somewhat with Bob as well. And I bring to you updates from the Supply Chain Integrity Working Group. The first update, which provides context for why me, just recently I was elected by the group, the new chair of the Supply Chain Integrity Working Group, taking over from Dan and Kim. So I'll be in the chair position, and then with Melba Lopez from IBM and Jay White from Microsoft as joint co-chairs of the working group. Dan and Kim were both supportive of that change, given that they've been spending their considerable OpenSSF energies elsewhere recently, and not been able to attend or drive the working group. So that's the first salient change. I think the other one, which is top of mind really across the supply chain integrity working group, is just the impending milestone of the 1.0 release of the SALSA specification. And so we've been working hard getting the specification ready for 1.0. We had a release candidate that was published towards the end of February with a set of known issues, which the team has been working through to close. Today, we're going to announce the second release candidate, RC2, which we will be publishing without any known issues. So this will actually be something which, if we have a quiet 2-week comment period and nothing super substantive comes up, the RC2 of the SALSA specification will roll forward to a 1.0 stable in a couple of weeks. And so, there's a parallel set of efforts alongside the SALSA specification working group actually driving the crystallization of the core spec and working through the issues list. There's now a separate thread of work which Jennifer, and I see that she's here. Jennifer has been driving around the comms plan for SALSA 1.0, and so making sure that we land that 1.0 specification with maximum impact in a couple of weeks' time. And so we're looking at, what press pre-briefings do we want? What quotes will we have? How will we? I think we'll be looking to use the OpenSSF.org blog and press release as the center of gravity of the launch. And then we have a constellation of contributing companies, including Google, ChainGuard, VMware, GitHub, and so on, preparing their own blogs on their own owned and operated properties, which will kind of echo the announcement and provide, some additional organizational context. But pointing back to that center of gravity, which will be the OpenSSF press release and announcement. It's been, coming nearly 2 years since the 0.1 release of SALSA specification. So it's been a fairly long journey, and it's been an incredible labor of love to get the SALSA specification from 0.1 to 1.0, which is where we're headed. And it's super exciting. I think, we're seeing increasing currency, and I see SALSA mentioned and adopted, in far-flung corners of the industry, well separated from the OpenSSF, which is, I think, super encouraging as to how it's spread. So that's on SALSA. Fresca, I dare say, slightly less encouraging news. We're trying to find contributors and maintainers to help us push the project forward. I think that there's a couple of aspects which I think are challenging with Fresca. I think that we don't have a clear line of sight into what downstream customers most want. Do they want an educational example, a great, very transparent, very legible implementation of a reference architecture which they can learn from and then apply the patterns from that to their own build system? Or are they looking for something which they can migrate their builds to and actually deploy in production, as this is a production system which we will adopt? I think that we're finding much less appetite than we'd anticipated on the second line, and so I think it's much less of a greenfield looking exercise than that had been imagined. And I think that what we've learned in Fresca land is that and there's a lot of sticking power with people's existing build systems, and so trying to figure out how to make Fresca more applicable to folks with existing infrastructure, so that they can lift the patterns and examples they see in Fresca land into their own pipelines, whatever they may be based on. It should be more of an emphasis from Fresca going forward. But the more pressing challenge is just the resources we have to apply in terms of hands-on keyboards. We've got lots of ideas, lots of input, lots of things we think we might want to do, but in terms of people who can actually type things into GitHub, we have less on that front. And so Michael Liebman is starting to publicize that. He's written a one-pager to frame Fresco. What's it for? What's it not for? What's its goals? What does it need? Where does it need to head? It's kind of almost a call to action or a call to arms to kind of gather contributors around and rally the community. But there is that gap between knowing and doing. We know what we've got to do, but we don't have the resources to actually put that into action and actuate it right now. Any questions on Salsa and Fresco before I move on? Nothing. Okay. So a quick update on S2C2F. S2C2F is a more recent addition to the SCI working group. And we're still working through an initial set of issues. Just some training material has been developed. And I think, Jay, you maybe a little closer to this than I am, and so please chime in if I get any of this wrong. But we have now a 90% complete training course around S2C2F, and we have a talk on S2C2F, which is prepped and ready and accepted in RSA, and we're excited to get that done, to continue the process of publicizing it and gaining momentum around S2C2F as a dependency management framework for supply chain integrity. And then zooming back out, one of the things we're trying to do at the SCI, the kind of the umbrella working group level, kind of above SALSA, above Fresco, above S2C2F, is pull together an overall vision for what does OpenSSF's direction and vision constitute for supply chain integrity. And so I've linked in the notes here a draft vision doc we've been working through as a team, and really thinking about, we have SALSA, which initially, SALSA 0.1 talked about, build and provenance and source requirements for getting to various SALSA levels. For the 1.0, we've scoped that down, so much of the focus is on build and provenance. We've moved out of scope the source requirements. And so we have that as something which stands now in SALSA's future. We'd like to add that back to SALSA in a subsequent version. I think looking at what other pillars of concerns do we want to add to our overall framework is what this vision doc is talking about. And so laying out the idea that the SCI working group as a whole could be looking at scalable, standardized practices for supply chain security. And under that umbrella, we're talking about decomposing the problem space ergonomically into what are these core pillars like build and provenance and dependencies and source and vulnerability management, and then having a framework which encompasses and speaks to leveled requirement across all these pillars. And the document is not laying out what we would call this or what the go-to-market motion would be for this thing, but I think that there is gathering consensus in a supply chain integrity working group that producing an Uber framework which spans the problem space of supply chain integrity and has specific scalable best practices which are testable and adoptable and readily reachable by various players in the industry. Having that Uber framework feels like a great vision for the group and something we can begin to move towards. And so, we might naturally ask the question, what do we want to add to SALSA next, or what does SALSA 2.0 look like, or what part does S2C2F play within SCI working group, and how do these things come together, and how does S2C2F plus today's SALSA aggregate into a 1 + 1 = 3 picture? That's what this vision doc is trying to get to, and thinking kind of beyond the projects we have within the working group today, and think more expansively about the problem space as a whole, and we can then look at what gaps do we have to fill. I am going to pause there. I talked a little bit about the chair change, SALSA 1.0, the comms plan, Fresca challenges therein, where we are with S2C2F, and then the supply chain integrity working group vision, which I've linked into the notes as well. And I'll pause for any feedback or comments.
No, appreciate all that, Isaac. I think it was obviously quite a bit going on. I guess one quick question: any specific asks of the TAC that the working group has?
I think I would center the asks on Fresca that if we can have the TAC help evangelize or identify actual people and actual organizations with use cases for Fresca. There's been a little bit of momentum and conversation recently about Sterling tool chains, which I think Fresca has some adjacency to and potentially some relevance to, but we really could do with some very specific use cases. What do actual real people and real organizations want to do? How do they see gaps in the Fresca problem space? And then the other thing is, anything the TAC can do to help rally or encourage folks to get involved with Fresca in terms of in hands-on keyboards form. Again, we have lots of people with great ideas and suggestions for what Fresca may become, what we may do next, but turning those things into reality is a gap that we have. So anything that we can do just in terms of gathering hands-on keyboards in the community would be awesome. And Arno, I see, is plugging the panel as well, which should help with the overall kind of awareness of where we are.
Zach, I see you have a question.
Not a question, but a comment. Just wanted to say how excited we are about the upcoming Salsa 1.0 release. And I think the focus on build integrity was exactly the right one, but also excited to hear that in 2023, you're thinking about how to add back in source controls, and looking forward to hearing more. Absolutely. Thanks for the feedback, Zach. And I'm really excited too, to be clear. I think it's a huge milestone, but it is a milestone. It's not a destination. We're not stopping there. We're getting to 1.0, and we do very much want to have, not just an internal sense of what the future of Salsa looks like, but an externally articulable one where we can actually talk to the community and to folks in this space about where this is going, and speak with some consensus and continuity about the direction for Salsa and supply chain integrity over the next 12 to 36 months.
Awesome. Any other comments or questions before we move on? Once, twice. Sold. All right. Thanks again, Isaac. Appreciate the update.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Next on the agenda, we have Jennifer Bly, who wanted to bring some updates and questions around OpenSSF Day PR and a monthly feature on the Foundation blog. So, Jennifer, over to you.
Yep, thanks, Bob. I wanted to discuss two things with the TAC. One, as we're moving toward OpenSSF Day, which is going to be held on May 10th, we're starting to build out our press kit. So what kind of things do we want to announce there? What do we have coming up that's going to kind of align with that timing? Please be thinking about that. And as you, come across items that would be good to announce as part of that, please let me know. We will be doing a press release just in advance of OpenSSF Day, welcoming our new members. And we have an opportunity to include some other things in there as well that we want to make sure that we point to. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up as well, we have a new blog series kicking off tomorrow. Big shout out to Crobe for getting us started with a feature of the best practices working group. But what we'd like to do is each month feature a different working group or project on the blog, kind of talk about recent accomplishments, what you have coming up, and then really highlight ways for people to get involved. Where do you need the most help? Where can people jump in? And using that as another way to drum up some participation.
Awesome. Do you have maybe a quick jump on the line here in terms of questions? Do you already have a second project or working group scheduled for the May one, or are you looking for ideas from the TAC?
So what I was hoping is that we can kind of follow the sort of schedule set out for when groups present to the TAC. So I haven't asked yet, but potentially the supply chain integrity working group, I can reach out and we can see if we can schedule you for May.
Speaking on behalf of Isaac, I think with the Salsa launch, that would certainly be of interest. Also, the upcoming stuff and the call for Fresca that we just heard, that makes a lot of sense. But okay, yeah, that logically makes sense to me, just to have it on a standing rotation. So
yeah, and if there is a specific time for individuals that works especially well, just let me know and we can create a content calendar accordingly.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Well, thank you. All right, any questions on that? Otherwise, we can move forward to Crobe. Go ahead, Kurt.
Hey, everybody, just a quick update. The BEST working group has been approached by a group of enthusiastic community members that have been toiling away on the mobilization plan. So we are pleased to announce that the working group decided to adopt the Memory Safety SIG, which is part of the mobilization plan Stream 4. We had our first official SIG call last week, and we are very excited to continue to refine the initial words from the plan and put forth another potentially actionable proposal for the foundation to consider to work with. That's it.
Awesome. Any questions for Croton? Once, twice sold. All right, thank you, Croton. All right, we have two final items on the agenda. One is, Brian, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about one of the topics that's on the governing board agenda for later this week, which is a proposal to expand the TAC. And then we also have representing Alpha Omega, Jonathan Leitchis, who is one of the security researchers who wanted to talk to the TAC around a proposed vulnerability disclosure policy. So Brian, I guess, would you be willing to give a brief update of that proposal, and just looking for maybe any feedback that folks have on what you're planning on taking to the GB meeting on Thursday?
Sure. So we've talked both here and on the governing board about whether, given a lot more activity since we've started, the focus on the Starling toolchain, whether we wanted to increase the size of the TAC. Also, given the growth of the organization as a whole, and the idea that we might want to make sure we've got the TAC representing somebody from each of the major projects or working groups and the like. So I figured now would be a better time than halfway through a TAC term. And at the meeting on Thursday morning, where the governing board will approve the 3 appointees, I will also be putting forth a proposal to modify the charter to expand the TAC from 7 to 9, to increase the number of elected by 1 and the appointed by 1, and so as to avoid another election cycle, to appoint 2 more representatives, 2 more TAC members. Now, both the 3 that we've recommended to the governing board and we'll be voting on Thursday, as well as the 2 more, which I haven't put forth a motion yet, specifically who, but will after the vote has been made, if the vote is made to expand the TAC. Those will be drawn from the folks who ran for this TAC election. So no surprises, it'll be people from the community. And generally speaking, it'll be people who scored well in the election. So, we hope this will serve the interests of all of us in trying to just have a really powerful TAC. And that's the parameters and the scope.
So any questions or comments from the room on this proposal? Was that a yes?
For me, sorry, I'm just clearing my throat and had my mic open. Apologies.
Okay. I'll say that, similar to my comments in the past, I certainly welcome participation. I'm not convinced that increasing a number from 7 to 9 solves a problem. I think making sure that the TAC is set up for success in terms of support from the foundation, staffing, I think are more compelling things to be focused on right now. The last thing I would say is that selecting folks out of the electorate certainly does make sense in terms of picking from a pool of folks that have shown interest and willingness to step up and help. And I think that's certainly noble and a worthy place to go looking. If we're simply picking people out of the electorate, though, I'm not sure why we wouldn't just, frankly, expand the number of elected seats. Because if it's the same pool, then letting the community ultimately make that determination feels more appropriate. But I'm still, I guess, going back on the broader question of, I know it's been discussed, but I think it's been, there's been some mixed feedback in the past. Jacques, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I wouldn't be doing my job wearing my hat as vice chair of the end users group if I didn't bring up that one of the reasons the end users group came into being was dissatisfaction at the composition of TAC. So to put that in a more positive light, what I would do is I would lay at the feet of the governing board that it would be healthy to have an end user voice involved in TAC, simply because when we're thinking as end users, we have unique needs and pain points. And often we don't have the same sort of insider expertise that someone who comes from a vendor might. So I would lay that at the feet of the governing board, that to ensure the best representation and also the best ability for the OpenSSF to serve the ultimate end users, that they should consider an end user representative as an appointment if that's what they're doing this year.
Okay, I'll carry those points forward into the conversation on Thursday. Bob, you'll be a part of that conversation, but we'll do this separate from the session that we share with the full TAC.
Sure. David Edelson has a hand up.
Yeah, I actually, I mean, agreeing, partially with Jock, but I really think that expanding the TAC would be very helpful. And maybe to address your concern, Bob, is instead, much as the way a governing board, most boards have different subcommittees, that maybe what we need is something where we have a TAC that is broader representation of both community. But again, I think I agree with Brian that this needs a lot more governing board input and real sort of skin in the game from the governing board on the TAC about and guidance and direction of how they want their resources used. But then being able to, while not making this overly bureaucratic or too complicated, is to have, just as there are, finance committee and governing committee and any major corporate board, to have some sort of a granularity in the TAC where you have sort of a steering committee or a group that's, the main operations, but a broader representation of the TAC in general for communication. So maybe that would be, again, not trying to sort of split the difference, but a way of trying to ensure that the TAC remains efficient and doesn't become unwieldy, but also is representative of the broader needs of this broadening security community and of this broadening organization. Which with this great leadership and the great investment and major corporations that are now coming on board to ensure that there are more voices and better communication.
No, thanks for the input, David. Maybe just a quick response. I'm certainly plus 1,000 on more folks engaged in doing the work. I'm just not convinced that adding +9 and having the TAC not set up for success or frankly not engaged really does move the needle. I think it's about engagement. And so whether it's 7 engaged people or 9 engaged people, I think either of those is a great outcome for the foundation. I just want to make sure that it's not simply a quantity challenge.
Oh, right. But just to follow up, I completely agree with your other point, Bob, of having staff. That the TAC needs some more support in the organization. It's a large role, it's a large job of the TAC itself, and your great job as chair of the past cycle. But it definitely needs more support staff from the OpenSSF to deal with all the logistics that is required of the TAC.
And to that point, it's a good reminder to note that we do have additional jobs open now for chief architect and for the ecosystem folks, and we are internally pulling in additional help from the community management team with the Linux Foundation. But we are executing on that as well, and we'll be fulfilling that ask from the TAC from back in November.
All right. Oh, thanks for that. Any final comments on the proposal? Otherwise, we can move over to Jonathan. I don't see any hands, so all right. Jonathan, over to you. And just as a reminder, again, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to make a binding vote on this today, but certainly, hopefully we get some good discussion on it and we can tee this up to get you some answers either asynchronously once the full TAC is seated or at the next meeting.
Correct. And that should be the next meeting-ish, hopefully.
Yes, it will be the next meeting.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Awesome. Perfect. So the vulnerability disclosures working group has been chewing on this document, which it's posted in the meeting notes. I will also post it into the chat for everybody. It is a proposal for the Open Source Security Foundation vulnerability disclosure policy. So this is not how vulnerabilities are incoming. That is another bit of work that is being done, primarily led by Luigi. This is for outgoing reports, primarily revolving around Alpha Omega, but any other security vulnerabilities that are discovered in the course of the work of the Open Source Security Foundation, and dictating how those disclosures will occur, what the policy is. This is I think it's good to know, or good to clarify up front. This is not a process document. This is a policy document. So it defines the set of steps that will occur, but not necessarily how they will occur. And at a high level, it covers things like, the 90-day deadline, or a disclosure time limit for reports that are coming out of the OpenSSF, and how we will deal with certain things like, this is very unlikely because we're mostly looking at source code, but in the rare event that we run into a 0-day vulnerability that we uncover that's actively being exploited, how we will report those, and also include some of the rationale. So has everybody had the opportunity to read through this document? Do we want to give like 5 minutes for people to skim it? I don't
know that I would give 5 minutes. I guess if maybe you just want to talk through the high points of it, that would probably be useful.
Yeah, I can do that. So at a high level, it basically communicates the Open Source Security Foundation adheres to a 90-day disclosure time limit. And then at 90 days, vulnerabilities that are reported by the OpenSSF will become public. And this doesn't include major public holidays, and doesn't overlap on work on weekends. So it will be a work day when the vulnerability is disclosed. We, similar to Google's policy, will offer a 14-day grace period if we get told that there will be a release occurring within 14 days post the 90 days. There's an expectation that we ask maintainers to respond to us within 21 days. And if we do not receive any engagement from the maintainer affirming the intention to fix the vulnerability within 35 days, the OpenSSF reserves the right to publicly disclose the vulnerability at that point. There's the clause about an O-day, and then there's also the rationale at the very bottom, which is about how our goal is to actually get vulnerabilities fixed and disclosed and reduce the risk of vulnerabilities and their exploitation by enforcing a disclosure deadline when we're reporting vulnerabilities. Are there any questions about this document?
Just so I understand that there's no sort of like surprises in those time windows, right? Like there's nothing that's out of sort of industry norms. You mentioned Google a few times.
90 days is actually it's on the longer length of time for the industry. I think the only organization that I found that has a longer timeline is the 0-day initiative, which is I think 120 days. But other industry groups have 45 days. I've talked to Katie Masuris. Her line, I think she said, like the original vulnerability disclosure deadline that was from one of the first research groups was like 7 to 14 days. So the norms have shifted to be a little bit longer. And this is so 90 days is a pretty respected amount of time in the industry writ large.
My other question, I guess, is that if I do the sums in my head, 90 days plus 14 days plus, say, allow 1 day if it lands on a public holiday somewhere, we would be looking at 105 days as the maximum window.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that math works. Yes. Yes, that math seems to work out.
Arithmetic is useful, people.
Yeah.
The teachers were right.
106 if it's a 2-day holiday, or because what weekends are. Yeah, weekends are holidays. Yeah,
weekends are holidays. You're right. Yeah, so it could be 107, say.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. Probe.
And just to provide everybody some context, the Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group has folks from many community and vendor security teams that have worked with Jonathan on kind of adjusting the language. There isn't really anything kind of out of whack with the suggested timelines or practices. They all kind of align with other communities. And just, I think the big thing is that Jonathan is just trying to provide a framework that is flexible enough to work within a lot of the existing community norms, and ideally trying not to upset maintainers as he's going through, he and other researchers are going through their work. And this is something you'll see most organizations like a HackerOne or Bug Crowd, those types of organization, bug bounty folks will have some type of policy that sets the expectations as researchers are reporting things. And it just helps that everybody involved in the process kind of can go to a resource to understand what the expectations are as people are going through and disclosing this. Just.
Yep. I moved myself. I did not. Okay. David Wheeler.
Yeah, just real quick, and Jonathan, I know you've thought hard about it. These are pretty typical vulnerability disclosure timeframes. I guess the one question is, one of the things that is being planned is releases of a large number of reports for basically essentially the same vulnerability to many projects, and that may create complications for reporting. And the easy way to report is here's your pull request, but if those are public, that's kind of a problem. I know you've thought hard about that. You want to talk real briefly about your thoughts about how to do the mass disclosures?
So this policy is narrowly focused to anything that's being manually disclosed. There is a separate document that's being worked on to describe a separate but similar policy for how vulnerabilities being reported via automation will be handled. So that's a link down there in the header automated disclosure policy. That is something that will come to the TAC eventually, but there is a SIG working on that document, and it basically describes the set of steps and processes that I can, early preview. The idea is to define what is an Open Source Security Foundation compliant automated vulnerability fix campaign, and that document will basically allow anybody who's bulk fixing security vulnerabilities at scale across open source to put a stamp on it saying this is Open Source Security Foundation this follows the specification that the OpenSSF has put out. But it again, that document is not complete and it needs more work and also some features that GitHub is working on to get released, so we can include those in the policy and process. Yes, does that answer your question, David? Great.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Jack.
Hello. Yeah, I don't have much to comment on with the times, but I do have some questions around the 0-day part. So it would need to be a vulnerability that you see in the wild, I guess. How would that work if you've disclosed this vulnerability to someone already, and then maybe halfway through the window, you find proof that it's under active exploitation? Would it then switch to the 7-day policy?
Not something I thought about, but yes, I believe that makes sense. So yes, I think that it's, and to be clear, the depending upon how widespread the implications of the exploitation is, the 7 days is an upper limit for how long a disclosure will have before. So if we see active exploitation and it's very bad, that it may be shorter than the 7 days. But yes, in general, that policy would take effect at that point. But again, I think it's important to note that as the Open Source Security Foundation, we are primarily looking at source code of open source software, and we are not Google or Microsoft, where you have deep, like you have a lot of data about running systems because you have logs coming back from large numbers of machines. So you can see active exploitation at a more fine-grained level. So the likelihood of us running into this case is far less likely than other research organizations potentially.
Got it. Yeah, and I guess if it's clear to you guys just looking at kind of public things, then it's very bad.
Yes.
Very obvious.
Yes.
One other question on this: is it just that they need to kind of come back, say they're dealing with it, and make a public statement? I know it mentions like mitigations, but they wouldn't necessarily have to have a fix. And I guess the question is, there's not really a way to impose consequences, I guess, if they don't do much after 7 days, other than just saying, hey, everyone, there's a problem and we don't have any mitigations ourselves. And the people who own the code haven't responded either. Like, would the OpenSSF and people involved come up with mitigations to help out, or just post it?
We may come up with mitigations if it seems like something that is something we have enough of a grasp to reasonably make that assertion. It's not a rule, but it is, the line about mitigations may involve patches. It may involve, documentation that gets published to say this is how to fix this, right? And that's mostly coming out of the maintainer. If the maintainer is not responsive, we will do our best, but it also I'm speaking more with my alpha omega hat on at that point, not stating that that's necessarily the entire policy for the entire organization, but alpha omega is more than happy to be involved with anybody who's doing disclosures from the OpenSSF to help guide that practice. Also the vulnerability disclosures working group too. So,
and I guess it still loops back to, if it's something that we see publicly, then yeah, it makes sense to talk about it.
It's bad. Yeah. David? You still got your hand up, David, or is that intentional, or is that a lingering hand?
Sorry, old hand.
Okay, old hand. Yeah. So I would love to. So LF Legal is currently reviewing this document. They will hopefully have a pass at it and get back to us by hopefully. Well, I don't know how long it'll take, but is the next TAC meeting in 2 weeks? 2 weeks. Okay. All right. So I will hopefully have an answer from them within that time. And at that point, we'll have any updates we've made from their feedback. And it would be lovely if we could have the TAC vote on that document at that point, on the policy at that point, as to whether or not to accept it or not. So if you could provide, if you have any feedback that you have not provided now, the next vulnerability disclosures working group meeting is tomorrow. So if you could, tomorrow, right. So if you want to provide your feedback before that meeting, it would be great if you could get it in before 11 a.m. tomorrow Eastern. Otherwise, yeah, it makes our life a little more complicated to discuss it in that meeting. So that's it. Any final questions before I yield the floor?
No, I think once you get that doc approved by LF Legal, Jonathan, it would be great to just go ahead and open an issue on the TAC repo. If we can drive it asynchronously faster than the meeting, we certainly can try to move faster. If not, we can use the meeting as kind of a compelling event to drive closure on it from that perspective.
There is an issue on the TAC repository.
Okay. Perfect. And just let us know when the legal review is done and we can take it from there.
Yep, can do. Both the comment on the issue and send an email to the TAC.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the time and for bringing us forward.
Yes.
All right, that rounds out the agenda that we had proposed for today. Any other topics that folks in the meeting would like to raise? Once, twice, sold. All right, well, we will go ahead and end the meeting there. Thanks everybody for the participation today, and look forward to seeing the rest of the TAC seated, and we'll see everybody in a couple weeks. Have a good day.